All right. So Christian's got quite the interesting hand here. Now,
Yeah.
this one is played out of Talking Stick. Is that right? You said?
Yeah, so this is at Talking Stick. This is on a Tuesday. It's a 10-20 game Mando straddle. And it's about seven-handed. It's all pros. So it's a pretty tough lineup, definitely battling.
Is this an uncapped game, I assume?
It's actually capped. Sometimes we take the cap off if the table agrees, but we're playing with a $7,500 cap in this hand.
70 like a $7,500 cap. Interesting. Are you a regular in the game?
I'm definitely reg in the room. I've been shot taking more in this game specifically, and I guess that comes into play maybe in this hand.
And how often does this game run there, by the way?
It always runs on Fridays. Usually we'll actually have like two tables on Fridays. Lately it's been running a bit more,
Okay.
but usually it's like Tuesdays and Fridays. 510 is typically the game that runs regularly in the time games.
And how deep are you?
So we're 15K effective in this hand. We're pretty deep. We're maybe 4 or 5 hours into the game.
Okay.
So yeah, the hand starts 10, 20, 40. I open ace of clubs, queen of diamonds, and the hijack. And then
To what?
oh, sorry. Yeah, I raised to 120 in this spot.
Okay.
Typically, the standard opens about 100, but I've been kind of messing around with sizes and was raising bigger in this game.
People are actually just raising to 100 at 10, 20, 40, just like the 2.5x.
Typically, yeah.
Does that cause more multi-way action, like coming out of the blinds?
I would say it doesn't. This game's like, especially this lineup, just a lot of 3-betting and 4-betting
Okay.
typically.
So that's why people are sort of like lowering their raise size so that they're, obviously risking less on their steals, and then it keeps the pot in check, right? Again, defending with 3 and 4 bets. Okay. So you go to 120.
Yeah, and just also with the straddle on, just trying to play deeper with big blinds.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I go to 120. I get 3-bet from the small blind, who is one of the more aggressive regs in our game. He makes it 600 out of the small blind.
So 5x.
Correct.
Okay.
So it folds back to me. I actually contemplate 4-betting for value.
For value, really?
Yeah, just versus specific villain.
Mm-hmm.
But I do decide to just flat in position.
I mean, obviously,
We're super deep here.
right. Obviously, your head's up. I mean, one of the other things too is, especially if it's a pro with this type of setup, with a 3-blind structure, because you said it's a mandatory straddle, any good pro is basically V-pipping 3-bet or fold in a 3-blind spot in the small blind.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
So I mean, he's just going to have every hand he's going to play is going to be a 3-bet hand, and I would say, if he's distributing his range like he should, you definitely have to at least continue here with ace queen. This is not a situation where you're running, you're opening from under the gun +1 calls, and then somebody in the middle blind, like the big blind or the straddle, comes swinging right for a 3-bet squeeze, and then you've got people behind you where you might just fold out ace queen. Is this a full ring table, by the way?
It's an 8-handed table. We're 7-handed in this spot. I believe somebody was like away from their seat. And just some background story on this villain. He definitely knows that I'm like kind of shot taking. And previously, I think that he would apply max pressure to me in a lot of spots just because I wasn't very comfortable at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a little background. And he's definitely very aggressive. So he's not afraid to go for it for sure. But anyway.
So it looks like the pot's 1250.
Yeah, 1250 to the flop.
Okay.
The flop comes all tens. So it's 10, 10, 10 rainbow.
All right. I'm going to put up 10 of clubs, 10 of hearts, 10 of diamonds.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact suits, unfortunately.
Okay. So 10, 10, 10.
Yeah.
Interesting one.
So definitely a flop that favors his range, of course. He bets 440.
When you say it favors his range, because you think he has more high pairs than you, because you would be 4-betting high pairs?
Right, yeah. He just has all the aces, kings. I obviously block a couple of combos of value, but obviously I'm still losing to some of his bluffs, right? Like ace, king here.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so he does continue. I decide to call and position on this board.
Well, I think you have to at least call, right?
Yeah, I definitely call.
Yeah.
Granted that obviously anytime that we might turn a pair, we're definitely looking to get some money in the pot here.
And then also too, I mean, the thing, is it looks like the pot's now 2130. I mean, depending on what comes on the turn too, and what his bet size is, even if you don't hit a pair, I might still continue, and you might even find it sometimes easier to continue with 2 overcards in a spot like this with showdown value than even holding on with a hand like pocket sevens. And again, that goes back to the whole thing of, if you're behind, at least you have some equity. Because if you had, let's say the turn's a deuce, right, and he fires again, like 2/3 or something like that. If you have 7/7 and he's got king or ace, you're drawing dead, right, on 10-10-10 deuce. Whereas at least with ace,
you just have no outs.
Yeah, like where at least with ace queen, if he's got jacks or something like that, queens, you've got some outs, right? The only thing of concern is, of course, that maybe you start to sometimes lose to some of his bluffs, right, in the form of holding ace king.
Yeah, and I was definitely aware of that.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, like we're behind all of his value and his bluffs in some spots here. But this is where, like, in this game and in this hand specifically, like, this was just street poker. Like, we're just battling hard all day. So anyway, I do call. Turn was a blank 6, so it doesn't bring in a backdoor flush draw. So it's a full rainbow board.
So 10 of clubs, 10 of hearts, 10 of diamonds, 6 of spades.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he overbets and puts me in a tough spot. So he bets 3,000 here on the turn. And this is where I did most of my tanking in the hand and thinking, kind of constructing his range, right? So he obviously puts me in a really tough spot with his bet sizing. I think in theory, like, we're obviously just supposed to fold here a lot.
Yeah, so if you see me on the live stream, I'm actually looking at my phone here because when you emailed this hand in, I actually sent this to one of our content creators, Nate, who obviously, he's in the solver streets. And I mean, my first inclination here was this has to be a fold usually on the turn here, especially with ace queen. Now, ace king, I mean, it's just interesting because I don't know off the top of my head here what is necessarily continued here in theory on the turn. Like, I would have to look at the outputs here, but I would assume that like jack and queen and things like that would be continued. I just thought it was interesting, but I did think that it was interesting though, how ace king kind of like falls into that. He says our calls on the turn are all obviously 10x, jack plus, and most ace king was what his response was. And he said ace jack and ace queen suited all call near half the time. Wow, that's maybe for ace queen of spades specifically. I don't know if we had the suits up here or not. Sometimes you wonder sometimes about these outputs. Yeah.
I obviously, like, this hand is just like pure like live poker, street poker, whatever you want to call it.
Right. Let me just ask you this question. What do you think this guy's value range here is?
Definitely like all the overpairs. I don't know if he's taking the sizing with jacks. I think he is on the turn sometimes, but definitely, queens plus. And I just think he has a lot of bluffs. And since we block aces and queens, I think we have a pretty good hand to get sticky with sometimes. And then obviously, like, the river comes into play here.
Right. We'll get to the river here in a second, but knowing the background that you gave us where you maybe, this guy, he's very aggressive. He thinks you might be shot taking. So he's might be putting more pressure on you than what is sort of at equilibrium. What are you doing with like a hand like 8s or 9s here?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I don't know, to be honest.
I mean, would you rather have ace queen or 8s or 9s here? I guess my question.
I think I'd rather have ace queen here just because we're blocking some of his value hands.
Well, I know that that's going to come into play here on the river when we get to the river, but
I think with 8s or 9s, I might fold just because any overcard that does come out, like, we just hate it, right? Like, even if he's bluffing and like the river's a queen, right? Like, we hate it. Like, he can just have all the like random king queen offsuits and king queen suited and things of that nature.
I mean, my counter to you would be that the reason why 8s or 9s might be more of a continue here than ace queen is if he ever has ace king that's played this way and then just gives up on a blank at the end.
Sure, then we just win. Yeah. I hear you on that. I don't disagree with you. I don't really know what I would do in that spot. This was definitely just like such a weird hand as played that it's really hard to say. I think that I would continue with 9s and maybe fold 8s sometimes, but they're pretty much the same hand on this board. So it's hard to say.
So you call, obviously, right?
I do call. This is with the point in the hand where I tanked the longest, and I actually made up my mind that like I wasn't folding river in this spot.
It's interesting you say that before we get to the river here. As the pot now is 81.30, because we are going to get an interesting river. The pot's 81.30. You guys have put in what, like 4,000. So you've got what, 11,000 left in your stack, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Nate, one of the other interesting things that Nate said is that if we call the turn, almost every hand that gets to the river is supposed to be called. This was putting in what the river was, but I don't actually think it matters that much though. But ace queen pure folds the turn.
In theory, the offsuit variety.
And then for some reason ace queen of spades calls half the time, but most of the ace queen is folded. All right, let's get to the river.
So the river is the king of spades. I actually really like this river just because it eliminates more combos of ace king, right? So if we are behind some of his bluffs here, we're still behind, right? Like,
right.
It doesn't change anything.
Right. The only thing that it changes is if the river was going to be a brick and he wasn't going to bet with ace king. Like if the river, so the river's a king, right? And, if you'll face a bet, but let's say the river was like a deuce, right? And he checks. I assume you're going to just check it back, right?
I would snap check back, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, that's why, you think you're calling across the turn. If you're behind, you have some equity, but then you also think that you have showdown value too.
I do.
Yeah.
And just against this villain specifically, like, I do think he's capable. Like he's just going to go for it with like king jack off, right? And like king jack suited and those type of hands. So like those hands obviously do get there on this river, but his sizing was pretty. So on the river, he bets 6,000.
Okay. So he didn't jam.
Yeah, he doesn't jam.
So small blind bets 6,000 here. So Hero's going to be getting 14. Hero's going to be getting 2.5 to 1 here at the end. And it's quite interesting because I actually didn't remember the sizing that he took because I was surprised that he didn't jam when you just told me that. But this is how sometimes the higher stakes are different. If you've been watching the live stream, because we just had a previous hand where I said there was sort of this paradox in live poker at like maybe 2-5 and below where, yeah, the larger you bet, the more you might actually get called down because people think that you're inherently polarized. But as you move to the higher stakes, even if he jams at the end here, he still might jam a king and he still might jam air, right? Or that's what he's supposed to be doing.
Yeah, he for sure would jam a king.
Right. But then from your perspective, you still might call though too, and you still might get owned by king X for that reason. So it does change as you get up sort of higher and higher. Here though, he doesn't jam. He bets 6,000. And I assume now that, well, it's interesting to note. You would think on paper that if you had Jack, Jack, or Queen, Queen, this becomes a check here.
I was just going to say that.
The only thing I would say about that, though, is that if he had like Jack, Jack, or Queen, Queen, and you are always 4-betting Ace, King pre-flop, then he blocks like you having a king. And could he go for value with like Queen, Queen here? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like where you're still heroing him down. So you're getting 2.5 to 1 here. Obviously, there's less of a chance, right, that he has a king here. You block ace, ace. Obviously, now I would say that you would rather have ace, queen here than 9-9, right, on the river.
Just based off the exact board.
Yeah, on the river.
Typically, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And my thought process was similar to what you were saying. So I kind of discounted him from having JJ just because of him betting here. It just felt like the nuts are nothing when he took this line on the river. So I do end up hero calling him here.
One quick thing to note here too. So hero calls. And like I said, I can understand your thought process. I still probably would have mostly folded turn here. But this is interesting. What we brought back, though, from what I had said, from what Nate said on the river, is that usually when you get to the river with what is supposed to be a calling range here on the turn, which was, Jack, Jack plus all 10s and ace, king, right? That nothing folds here at the end, right? So it's kind of like breaks the whole input here when you call across a turn that you're not supposed to call, right? When you say, oh, everything's supposed to call here at the end. What the other thing that I was going to say here was that you, well, again, like you blocked like the ace king. I'm trying to think, there was some, it's interesting. There was the last thing that I had to say, but it just kind of, oh, yes. Somebody made a comment here in the live chat here too. And I don't know if you noticed this, but it's actually hard on the surface to pick out. For some reason, if he's like running a bluff with like ace 4 or ace 5, you actually chop with that hand now. I don't know if you looked at that. The board is 10, 10, 10, 6. I know, king. I didn't even think about that either. 10, 10, 10, 6, king. You chop with another ace.
Yeah, that's a good point. I actually never thought about that.
Yeah.
I actually thought I had just no pair here. Maybe I guess I do chop.
You do. You chop with, you don't, you chop with ace 5. I don't know how that plays into the equation at all, because sometimes like he's bluffing and you chop here. So you do make the call and the reveal.
I do make the call. He rolls over 8-7 suited of hearts.
8-7 suited of hearts.
Yes.
8-7 suited of hearts.
And what's funny is this villain is actually one of my good friends now in the game, and we talked about this hand
because of this hand or before.
I would say probably more so just from this hand. Like, and you know what's funny is like he loved my call, which is funny, right? Like he was a really good sport about it, and he thought it was a great call. So obviously, I'm probably supposed to fold turn here a lot, but just based off history and just a pure live read, I just stationed really hard here, which is probably not good. But
I'm trying to think about how he played his hand here. So the way that he plays his hand, because it's really interesting to note of the way that sometimes when we take a look at backdoor draws, when there's trips out there, like how does that ever come into play? Like he picks up a gut shot here to a 9, but the board's 10, 10, 10. So
yeah, he still just loses to
right. He loses to any pair, but he beats ace high. I mean, I would think on paper that his line is probably fine.
Yeah, I think he played the hand pretty well, just based off of what he had.
Except for the fact that there might be a deviation at the. I think there might be he might have made like a live poker deviation at the end where maybe everything's supposed to just jam all in.
I think I fold to a shove.
Well, that's interesting because that was the last question I was going to ask you. What if he had jammed? Because you guys had, what did we say, 11,000 left?
Yeah, I think I fold to a shove, and that was kind of my plan. So, like I told you, on the turn I did most of my tanking, and my plan was to fold to a shove, depending on the river. Obviously, like if we river an ace or queen, like I'm just going to have to call. But based off of his sizing, I pretty much snap called. I maybe thought about it for 4 or 5 seconds and called.
And the reason why, for some of you that might think that that's a little bit odd, is just because you thought you had enough showdown value anyways going across turn, and then you thought that there were enough bluffs, and now when the king comes, it just means he's got less king, right, and ace king, for the most part, right?
Exactly. And maybe that thought process is bad. Maybe, maybe I'm supposed to call more to a jam, but based off of his sizing, I just couldn't really put together a combo of value hands that he would take with this size besides like exactly ace, king, king, jack, or ace, ace.
And then of course too, if you don't think he's betting or jamming with jack, jack and queen, king with jack, jack or queen, queen, right? And then the king comes, there's that too. Now he doesn't have jack, jack. Now he doesn't have queen, queen. You block aces. There's less ace king. I mean, that's the thought process. What if the river was like a low brick and he bet, like say the river was a deuce and he bet, say, jam or 6,000?
Versus jam, that would have been a really tough spot. I think he has a lot more value on this board when he does fire the third clip all in. I think he does find the jam with jacks just because he's a really good player.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a good question. I think that I was still going to call 6K. A jam would be a much tougher spot. I guess I didn't really think about it
too much. I mean, my concern here, because if I was your opponent and I got to the river and I had ace king and the river was a deuce, and I blocked you having, well, like you're going to always four bet aces and kings, right? I mean,
Yeah, I'm also going to four bet ace king for value like every time.
Right. I was just thinking that if I was somehow going to try to rep, a big pair and you were holding on with like eights or nines, right? And I jammed with ace king, that would really suck if you called with ace queen.
Yeah.
For you.
Yeah.
I mean, that's got to come into play somewhat, right?
Yeah, it definitely would.
Yeah.
And that's a good point. I think that the river just helped me make my decision quickly. I think that if it was a brick, that I would have been in a much more tough spot.
Yep.
I think that the river just helped us find a call. I don't know what you think you would do in that spot or what the chat's saying, because it's obviously a crazy hand, but
I agree. I agree with you that the river. I mean, again, I told you I would have folded the turn, right? Which is mostly, I think, we knew. But I understand what you're saying. I mean, it makes perfect sense about the river being a king, and you could easily make the case that this is much more of a call with ace queen on a king board than on a low board for sure. Even though he's going to be betting with ace king, but you were losing ace queen king anyways.
Yeah, it doesn't change anything, right?
But his range almost becomes more compact for value. Thank you very much for the call. I appreciate it.